Let's face it, you turn on the news these days and, well, it feels like everyone's walking around with a knot in their stomach about the economy.
Yeah, it really does.
You're definitely not alone if you feel that way.
Yeah.
So we're doing what we do best here, digging into what's being said without all the panic buttons and the shouting heads.
Exactly. And we've actually come across some recent commentaries, specifically a segment from the DRM New W's podcast that took a pretty interesting angle on, everything that's going on financially.
Interesting is one word for it. They took a deep dive into the latest Saturday Night Live. And honestly, it's the kind of humor that really makes you think, even while you're maybe chuckling a bit.
Right.
So we've got their take right here, ready to unpack. Our goal today is basically to figure out what this comedic lens tells us about the real worries, the ones we all have about the economy and the former president's impact.
And try to do it without the usual skies falling routine.
Exactly. No panic here.
What's fascinating, I think, is how sharp satire can be. How it cuts through the noise and hits on some, uncomfortable truths.
Even with a punchline.
Even with a punchline. And this DRM New W podcast segment really illustrates that, I think.
Okay, all right, let's jump right into it. The cold open. Apparently, this is a bit of a running gag. For the third year, SNL had Trump comparing himself to
Jesus.
To Jesus, yeah. Let's just say a very famous historical figure.
Yes, the Donald Jesus Trump sketch. The DRM News podcast really highlighted how the central joke revolved around Trump drawing these parallels between Jesus clearing the temple of money changers and his own economic moves, specifically the tariffs he put in place.
Okay, so Jesus getting rid of the money changers versus Trump's tariffs leading to, in the sketch's words, money's gone.
Pretty much,
And it gets wilder from there, right? I mean, he's actually saying he's the Messiah because of the mess I made out of the economy.
It's audacious. You almost have to admire the audacity, even if you, completely disagree with the premise itself.
Right. But this comedic exaggeration, while it's funny, it does reflect a real concern, doesn't it? About the immediate and sometimes, unpredictable impact of these big policy shifts on our finances.
That's something economists often point to, yeah. Especially with rapid changes in trade policy. It creates ripples.
That's the crux of good satire, isn't it?
Yeah.
Taking a real concern.
And pushing it to an absurd extreme to make a point. Definitely.
So the DRM News Post podcast, they noted how the sketch then referenced the former president's announcement, the 90-day pause on some tariffs.
Right, that pause. Notably excluding China, of course.
Of course. And SNL portrayed this as the beautiful tariffs working so well they had to be stopped.
Which the commentary really picked up on the inherent contradiction there. It's classic satire.
Absolutely. And then came that stock market line. Oh, boy.
Which one was that?
The stock market did a Jesus. It died. Then on the third day, it was risen. And then on the fourth day, it died again, possibly never to return.
Oof. Yeah. That hits at the real volatility a lot of folks are seeing, in their 401ks, their investment.
It does. This rapid up and down, it's exaggerated for comedy.
Sure, but it mirrors those periods of real uncertainty in financial markets, doesn't it? Often triggered by big policy announcements or shifts in investor confidence, stuff economists watch really closely.
And the line that followed that, now everything is back exactly how it was, minus a few $1 trillion.
Yeah, that one really underscores the feeling that, okay, maybe things look superficially okay on the surface, but there's been a significant amount of wealth just gone, eroded.
And they didn't pull any punches with the more pointed stuff, did they?
Yeah.
According to the DRM New W's podcast analysis, the sketch had Trump talking about a historic transfer of wealth from the middle class to my buddies.
And then just a casual, oh, well.
Right, a casual, oh, well. It's satire, sure, but it definitely echoes some of the real criticisms about who actually benefited from certain economic policies.
Yeah, when commentary like that talks about wealth transfer, what are they usually pointing to? Specific policies?
Well, they're likely referencing things like tax cuts that maybe disproportionately favored the wealthy, or deregulation that might benefit big corporations more than, say, the average worker.
And the oh well dismissal in the sketch just satirizes that perceived lack of concern maybe for the impact on the middle class.
Okay, then they really leaned into the religious comparisons again. Trump commenting on people only showing up to church on Christmas and Easter.
And then admitting he skips those days himself.
Right. It all plays into this, carefully crafted public persona.
The DRM News podcast suggested this sort of reinforces the idea of a maybe superficial engagement with certain values rather than genuine belief.
And the 401k joke, oh man.
What was that one?
We look at our 401k and say, Jesus Christ, where did it all go?
Yeah, I think a lot of people can unfortunately relate to that sinking feeling when they check their retirement accounts these days.
Totally. So for you listening at home, what's the key economic signal or concern this comedic take is highlighting? It's really that feeling of financial insecurity, right? That your hard-earned savings might be vanishing, and it's not even your fault.
Exactly. It connects that broad economic anxiety to a very personal, very real concern.
They even snuck in a jab about groceries, the rising cost of groceries, with that Easter egg hunt analogy,
Oh, yeah.
saying the eggs in the store cost $1 trillion billion. It's a small example, everyday stuff.
But it hits home, doesn't it? How inflation impacts everyone. Those seemingly minor increases, they add up.
They really do. It's the accumulation of those rising costs that
Yeah.
puts a strain on household budgets.
Definitely.
And finally, the punchline of the whole cold open, basically. The satirical lesson from Mr. Jesus, we must never mix religion with commerce.
Right before they hawk a Trump Bible.
A Trump Bible, made in America for $1,300.
That falls apart instantly.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up the whole commentary in that sketch, doesn't it?
It's a really biting piece of social commentary, using that irony, that juxtaposition to critique perceived hypocrisy and maybe the potential for grift.
Okay, so that was the cold open. Phew.
I do.
But SNL wasn't done, apparently. They also did a parody of The White Lotus.
Ah, yes, the white POTUS. Clever.
Clever. This one centered on Trump on vacation, sort of freaking out about potentially causing a recession.
Right, which mirrored a character in the actual HBO show who was trying to hide his own financial ruin.
So beyond the humor, what does this kind of parody tell us about maybe the public perception of leadership during economic downturns and that pressure to maintain a facade of control?
Well, it taps into that anxiety, I think, about leaders appearing out of touch or maybe unwilling to acknowledge serious economic problems. The character in The White Lotus is all about maintaining this wealthy image, right?
Right.
And the parody just applies that same idea to the political stage.
And Melania's line, "Oh my goodness," delivered, according to the DRM News podcast, in a North Carolina accent.
Yeah, that detail was in there.
Her line was, "Can you imagine how awful it would be if America lost all of its money and no one in the world respected us anymore?"
Yeah.
And then she asks Trump point blank about letting the economy fall apart.
The accent adds a sort of comedic layer, sure, but the underlying sentiment about America's economic standing and, global reputation is actually quite pointed.
It really raises that fundamental question, doesn't it, about national strength being tied to economic stability and international standing.
Absolutely.
And the fact that Trump, in the sketch, is secretly glued to a Newsmax headline, what was it? "Trump triggers worldwide recession," while trying to act like everything's fine.
That's just classic satire. It plays on that idea of a disconnect, maybe, between public pronouncements and private realities, a theme you see a lot in political commentary.
Right. It highlights the potential for leaders to downplay or ignore negative news, even while privately being aware of how severe the situation might be. They even had folks playing RFK Jr. and Ivanka making a run for it to a monastery.
Yeah, it sounds like they really went all in on the absurdity of the whole political landscape. Those cameos likely just added to the comedic chaos.
And further blurred the lines between the real political figures and the characters in this White Lotus parody, amplifying the whole satirical effect.
It adds another layer of commentary, too, by bringing in other figures who are part of the current political conversation and placing them in this context of, potential economic meltdown.
Okay, now shifting gears a bit, the DRM News podcast also focused on another sketch called CheckTche Business channel.
Ah, yes.
This one sounds like it hit a little closer to home for a lot of us who are, watching every penny right now.
Indeed. The whole premise was basically a financial news show, but tailored specifically for people living paycheck to paycheck.
So really focusing on how the cost of everyday stuff is just going up and up.
Exactly. Like those seemingly minor increases we talked about with groceries, they can have a huge impact on household budgets. And the sketch used humor to bring attention to that economic reality for many people.
What were the examples they used?
They mentioned Sergeant Munch cereal as the budget-friendly, but maybe not so great alternative to Cap'n Crunch.
Right, the knockoff brand.
And the price of candy bars suddenly being outrageous. Things like that.
Those are the small, tangible ways we all feel inflation in our daily lives, aren't they?
It's the cumulative effect. That's what puts the strain on people's finances. It makes those abstract economic concepts very concrete and relatable.
Okay, finally, let's dive into the weekend update commentary from the show. Colin Jost seemed to really focus on the irony, right? of Trump trying to fix economic problems.
That some would argue his own policies might have contributed to in the first place. Yeah.
And the line about the 90-day pause feeling like a goddamn decade.
Yeah, that really captures that sense of impatience, I think, and frustration that a lot of people are feeling with the slow pace of any perceived improvement.
Joseph's analogy, too, comparing the BE cool tweet.
Oh, right, to someone who's maybe had a bit too much trying to act normal around their parents.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of using humor to point out a perceived disconnect between how serious the situation is and the response to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought up the reported surprise of tech CEOs regarding the tariffs, comparing Trump talking about them to Bubba Gump rattling off all the different kinds of shrimp.
Huh. Yeah, that paints a picture, doesn't it, of a policy that maybe wasn't as well understood or consistently explained as it could have been?
That comparison, it underscores the idea of the tariffs being this dominant, maybe overwhelming topic from one perspective.
While maybe being a less central focus for others who might have supported the administration or just weren't directly involved, suggests a potential lack of coherence, maybe, or clear strategy behind the policy.
Michael Che's take was equally pointed, according to the DRM New W's podcast. He described the tariffs as being like taking a whole bottle of medicine with a glass of vodka and laid in a warm bath.
Wow. Okay. Not exactly a recipe for a stable economic recovery, is it?
Not really. That analogy, it vividly conveys the sense of a potentially reckless or ill-advised approach to fixing the economy with unintended and possibly harmful consequences.
It really highlights the risk of solutions that might create more problems than they actually solve.
And the mention of Elon Musk reportedly appealing to Trump.
Followed by Che's little hand gesture mimicking Musk.
Yeah, that definitely added a bit of spice, raised some eyebrows. The DRM New W's podcast likely included that detail to highlight the various stakeholders, the influencers, trying to sway policy decisions.
As his gesture just adds that visual, potentially provocative element to the discussion, underscores the influence that powerful individuals and corporations can have on economic policy.
And lastly, Bowen Yang's character, Chen Biao, the Chinese trade minister, he offered a totally different perspective, didn't he?
Right. He questioned which side, China or the U.S., is more willing to tough it out in a trade war.
Contrasting China's long history with the U.S. sending Katy Perry to space.
Yeah. It's a funny but pretty sharp jab at American priorities, maybe suggesting we're focused on the wrong things.
It definitely raises an important question about long-term resilience and national priorities, especially in the context of global economic competition, using the somewhat absurd comparison to make the point.
It offers a reminder that these economic conflicts have global dimensions, and different countries have different strengths, different weaknesses, different historical perspectives.
So when you put it all together, it sounds like this DRM News as podcast analysis by Dissecting Saturday Night Live delivered a darkly funny, but also pretty sharp commentary.
Yeah, on the economic fallout from the former president's policies, and also just the widespread anxieties that so many of us are feeling right now.
Absolutely. I think the key takeaway here is that even through the lens of comedy, maybe especially through comedy, serious points are being made.
Points about economic instability, the potential consequences of policy decisions, and just that general sense of uncertainty that's kind of hanging in the air.
It's a good reminder, I think, that sometimes even when we're laughing, there's a real message there about the challenges we're all facing.
Which I think raises a crucial question for you, for our listeners. As you navigate this current economic landscape, what do you make of the role of political leadership in shaping our financial realities?
And maybe, can humor actually be a valuable tool in understanding these really complex issues?
It's definitely worth considering, I think, as you think about what all this means for your own situation.